This is Nerd World Problems, things that matter to awesome people. Colin Baker hates fan polls, and I can understand why, because whilst it invites people to collectively agree on and celebrate the very best of something, as a consequence we kind of agree on what is the absolute worst part of a whole, or the least favourite. These days, with information so abundant and freely available, the results of such polls are published in full. It would be like having every single person in the world rated and ranked, and those results published in full. Not just the top 10 people, absolutely everyone. So pity the poor soul that ends up voted for the least. Who knows, it could be you. Sadly, less enlightened individuals tend to rank Colin's time as the Doctor as a lesser favourite, usually ending up either at the bottom or very near to the bottom, for one reason or another. I can sort of sympathise with why, but I can't help but think that a lot of misjudgment comes from a misunderstanding of what they were trying to do at the time, or a lack of consideration for uncontrollable factors, and just pure reputation. Then there is always bias. People who vote in Doctor Who polls haven't necessarily seen all of Doctor Who. Heck, a large proportion of it is still missing. There's no guarantee that they will ever have watched an episode of the Sixth Doctor, or even an episode of Doctor Who at all. This kind of system works by not really questioning the qualifications of the voter. You can't really say what qualifies someone as a Doctor Who fan and then saying if you fall below a certain level, your vote doesn't count. Needless to say, in the most recent Doctor Who magazine poll, Day of the Doctor came out on top, but is that really surprising given that it's one of the most watched episodes of any television programme in the world ever? So I'll be taking an objective look at the Colin Baker era, episode by episode, to weigh up how the Sixth Doctor and Doctor Who as a whole had its public image and reputation tainted by various factors, and also celebrate the good about the era. We start of course with the Twin Dilemma. So it's become something of an urban myth that the Twin Dilemma is the only occasion where a Doctor's first story occurs in the same series as a departure of the previous incarnation. Wrong! 3 stories into season 4 we got Power of the Daleks, hailed so greatly as a lost classic that the BBC have reconstructed it from the ground up with animation. 3 stories into the series and the lead actor changes. Absolutely mad. But it worked, and consider at this stage Doctor Who was more or less being broadcast 52 weeks of the year. So season breaks didn't really mean that much, the change of lead was just something that happened one night. 20 years later, the Twin Dilemma comes along. By this point the series had a format, episodic structure, season breaks, and we were much more accustomed to the idea of regeneration. Heck, a year before, there was an episode celebrating the very legacy the show had created, featuring 3.5 incarnations of the Doctor. So at this stage, to have screened 6 stories with the 5th Doctor, kill him off spectacularly in the caves of Androzani, and then tag the first adventure with his successor onto the end of that season, seems alarmingly cavalier. I'm not saying having a regeneration mid-series is a bad thing, on the contrary, it could have worked absolutely spectacularly. But when you decide to do it in the penultimate story of the season, it does kind of make what follows feel like a bit of an afterthought. And that pretty much sums up what happened to the Twin Dilemma. It became something of an afterthought. Having blown the budget on the 5th Doctor's swan song, and of course the rest of the series, it didn't really leave much in the way of time and resources to invest in the introduction of this new incarnation. Plus the fact the story was beset by additional production problems beyond anyone's control, that being industrial strike action. Given the circumstances, it might have been kinder to cancel the story altogether and either remount it the following year, similar to what had been done with what eventually became Resurrection of the Daleks, which was planned as the finale to season 20, or just introduce the new Doctor at the beginning of the following season. The Twin Dilemma isn't all bad though. I mean, sure, there are some serious issues, and some of the sets are dreary, the costumes are garish, and the Doctor is symptomatic of generally shocking design choices all around, and it looks a bit rushed to the point of lacking coherence. I refer, as a specific example, to the cliffhanger where Perry materialises in the TARDIS, completely ignoring Hugo Lang, which wouldn't be such a big deal if he hadn't been adorned in a glittering multicoloured kimono. But there's some potential in there, in the visuals. The sheer vision and the creativity behind the bird-like Gicondans shows ambition the likes of which hasn't really been seen since, well, probably since the Web Planet. Mestor on paper is an utterly repulsive gastropod that should have made your skin crawl. Think of Jabba the Hutt in Star Wars. But instead we get Edwin Richfield, who, fun fact, was Captain Hart in the Sea Devils, almost incomprehensible, dressed as a big, cuddly slug, trying desperately to emote using the only parts of his anatomy that were visible, that being his arms. What mustn't be overlooked is Colin Baker himself. Here we see his game plan in full force, attempting to bring some light and shade to the character. He is manic, absolutely, and it is perhaps a bit black and white in patches, possibly due to the haste in which this story was produced, but blimey is it evocative. You have to applaud Colin Baker, Eric Saywood and John Nathan Turner for trying to do something new with the character. However, this new character setup all has to be crammed into 90 minutes, so there is little room for subtlety, and for some viewers it may have left a bitter taste in the mouth. This is the start of a new story, so Season 21 reads like a novel that has the first chapter of the sequel hastily scribbled onto the back cover. Aside from Perry, who was only introduced 2 stories ago herself, there are no returning elements to bridge the gap, unlike previous regenerations, which have seen the Daleks, Unit, and the Master, which have been used to smooth the transition on each respective occasion, and remind the audience that this is still Doctor Who. Ultimately, the Twin Dilemma is on paper an average story, overcome by external factors. Whilst having a game plan and the best of intentions, it doesn't so much confidently jump into the grave of its predecessor as a means to an end, rather it stumbles rather embarrassingly into it and makes a poor first impression. It's still done with conviction, and Doctor Who always has been, but perhaps it's taken a bit too seriously and is a bit too humourless. Take all the elements included in this story and rebalance it as a character piece first, about this new Doctor, and relegate the admittedly flimsy plot into the background, this could have been a standout story. The story ends on something of a cliffhanger of, is this what Doctor Who is now? Which with 9 months off the air was a very bold note to end on in the minds of the viewers, considering the scale of the journey that we were intended to embark on. Of course, in hindsight, the reputation of this story is stuck in a vicious cycle, again with the polls ranking this at the bottom and Caves of Androzani usually at the top. It's become folklore that one of the best Doctor Who stories ever is immediately followed by one of its worst, and so the myth perpetuates itself. So is it really any surprise if viewers go in expecting the worst story ever, and conclude at the end either that it wasn't so bad, or that it was indeed the worst story ever? But just writing this analysis, I felt the urge to watch it again, so there is something to like in it. If everything had planned out as intended, perhaps this story would have been a lot more significant and a lot more fondly remembered, but things clearly didn't work out that way. I hope you've enjoyed this episode by episode analysis of the Sixth Doctor. Please let me know your thoughts about the character in the comment section below, and if you want to see more videos like this. In the meantime, please check out my blog Nerd World Problems at drtripod.wordpress.com, where you can find typed up versions of each of these episodes.